The music teacher looked Elvis directly in the eye and said the words that would haunt him for years. "You're not what we're looking for. Next." It was May 3rd, 1951, in the cramped rehearsal room behind the auditorium at L.C. Humes High School in Memphis, Tennessee. 16-year-old Elvis Presley stood on a small wooden platform holding a borrowed guitar, his hands still trembling from the song he'd just performed. Around him, 15 other students waited their turn to audition for the annual Spring Talent Showcase, the biggest event of the school year. The room smelled like old wood and dust, and the single window let in a shaft of afternoon sunlight that made everything look hazy and dreamlike. Mr. Harold Jensen sat behind a folding table with a clipboard, a pencil, and an expression that made it clear he'd already made up his mind before Elvis had sung a single note. Jensen had been teaching music theory and choir at Humes for 23 years. He believed in structure, in tradition, in the kind of music that had rules you could write down and test on paper. He wore the same gray suit to every audition, kept his hair slicked back with military precision, and spoke in clipped sentences that left no room for argument or appeal. His office wall was covered with certificates and awards, all of them celebrating his devotion to classical excellence and traditional musical values. "Next," Jensen repeated, not looking up from his clipboard where he'd just written something next to Elvis's name. Elvis didn't move. His feet felt glued to the wooden platform. He'd waited 2 hours and 17 minutes for this audition, sitting on a hard bench in the hallway while other students went in and came out, some smiling, some dejected. He'd borrowed the guitar from Tommy Wilson in his English class, a kid who barely knew him, but had been nice enough to lend it anyway. Elvis had practiced for 3 weeks, choosing the song carefully, making sure every chord was clean, every note was right. This was supposed to be his chance to show people at school that he wasn't just the weird, poor kid with the strange clothes and the hair that was a little too long and a little too slicked back, that he was somebody, that he mattered. "Sir," Elvis said, his voice barely above a whisper, cracking slightly on the single syllable. Did I do something wrong?" Jensen finally looked up from his clipboard, his eyes cold and annoyed behind wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light and made them look like blank circles. "You did exactly what I expected you to do, Mr. Presley. You played guitar adequately, not exceptionally, but adequately, and sang a song that doesn't belong in a school talent showcase. This is a family event. We have standards. We have expectations. We need performers who understand that." "I can sing something else," Elvis said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. "I know lots of songs, gospel, country, ballads, whatever you need." "The problem isn't the song," Jensen interrupted, his tone suggesting he was explaining something obvious to someone too dim to understand. "The problem is you don't understand what appropriate performance looks like. The way you move when you sing, the way you—" He paused, searching for the right words, his mouth twisting slightly as if he'd tasted something unpleasant. "The way you present yourself is unsuitable for a school event. This showcase represents Humes High School to the community. Parents bring their young children. We have standards of decorum." Elvis felt his face burning, heat spreading from his neck up to his ears. He knew exactly what Jensen meant. When Elvis sang, he moved. He couldn't help it. The music got inside him and his body responded, his hips swaying slightly, his legs shaking, his whole self caught up in the feeling of the song. It wasn't something he planned or thought about. It just happened, as natural as breathing, as automatic as his heartbeat. He'd tried to stay still during the audition, had actually concentrated on keeping his body rigid and controlled. But by the second verse of That's All Right, his body had started moving on its own, responding to rhythms that Jensen's clipboard and rulebook couldn't measure. "Mr. Jensen, I can stand still. I can control it. If you just give me another chance, I can—" "This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Presley." Jensen made a sharp mark on his clipboard with his pencil, the sound like a small crack in the quiet room. "You're not selected for the showcase. Please return the guitar to whomever you borrowed it from and send in the next student. We have a lot of auditions to get through." Elvis stood there for 3 more seconds, hope dying in his chest, willing Jensen to look up again, to change his mind, to see something worth giving a chance to. But Jensen had already turned his attention to his notes, arranging papers, checking his watch, dismissing Elvis as thoroughly as if he'd never existed, as if the song he'd just poured his heart into had been nothing more than background noise. Elvis walked toward the door, the guitar clutched against his chest like a shield. As he reached for the doorknob, he heard Jensen call out without looking up. "And Mr. Presley, this might be a good time to consider whether music is really where your talents lie. Not everyone is meant to perform. There's no shame in recognizing your limitations." Elvis didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat was too tight, his eyes already stinging with tears he absolutely refused to let fall until he was outside, until he was somewhere no one could see. Behind him, he heard Jensen's voice, suddenly warmer and more welcoming. "Barbara Henderson, please come in." Barbara Henderson brushed past Elvis in the doorway without acknowledging him. Barbara was everything Elvis wasn't. She came from a good family. Her father was a lawyer, her mother was on the school board. She took private voice lessons, twice a week from a teacher who'd studied at Juilliard. She wore expensive dresses that looked like they came from magazines, and she sang with the kind of technical perfection that teachers loved, all the notes in the right places, every breath controlled, every phrase shaped exactly according to classical rules. Elvis had heard her practicing during lunch period once, singing scales in the music room while he ate his sandwich outside the door. She was good in the way that made sense to people like Jensen, predictable, safe, appropriate. Elvis made it down the hallway and into the boys' bathroom before the tears started. He locked himself in the farthest stall, the one with graffiti scratched into the paint and a door that didn't close quite right, and cried as silently as he could manage, one hand pressed against his mouth to keep from making sound, his shoulders shaking. The guitar leaned against the tiled wall, and he couldn't even look at it without feeling a fresh wave of humiliation. How stupid he'd been to think this would work. How naive to believe that if people just heard him sing, really heard him, they'd understand that he had something special. He'd actually practiced in front of his mirror at home, had stood in the tiny bathroom at Lauderdale Courts, and sung to his own reflection, adjusting his stance, trying to control the movements that came so naturally. His mother had listened through the door and told him he sounded beautiful. But mothers had to say things like that. Jensen didn't have to say anything, and he'd made his opinion crystal clear. Elvis stayed in that bathroom stall for 47 minutes, until he heard the hallway outside go quiet, until he was sure the auditions were over and everyone had gone. Then he emerged, washed his face with cold water that did nothing to reduce the redness around his eyes, and walked back to the rehearsal room to return the guitar. Tommy Wilson was waiting in the hallway, sitting on the same bench where Elvis had waited earlier. "Hey man," Tommy said, standing up. "How'd it go?" Elvis couldn't meet his eyes. "Didn't make it? Sorry about your guitar, I didn't drop it or anything." Tommy took the guitar and looked at Elvis's face. "Jensen's an asshole," he said simply. "Everyone knows it. He rejected my brother 2 years ago for the same showcase. Said his trumpet playing was technically proficient but emotionally excessive. My brother plays with a jazz band now and makes more money in one weekend than Jensen probably makes in a month." Elvis managed a weak smile. "Thanks for letting me borrow it." "Anytime, man. And hey, if you ever want to jam sometime, I know some guys who get together on weekends." Elvis nodded, not trusting himself to speak anymore, and walked toward the exit. The school hallways were mostly empty now, just a few students at their lockers, their voices echoing off the linoleum floors. Elvis kept his head down and walked fast, wanting only to get home, to get to Sono's, his room, to be somewhere no one could see him. The walk from Hume's to Lauderdale Courts took 23 minutes if you walked at a normal pace. Elvis made it in 15, his legs carrying him quickly through the Memphis streets, past houses that looked nothing like the small apartment where his family lived, past kids playing in yards who had fathers with good jobs and mothers who didn't have to take in laundry to make ends meet. His mother, Gladys, was in the kitchen when Elvis came through the door. She was standing at the stove stirring something in a pot, but she turned the moment she heard him, and one look at his face told her everything. "Baby," she said, setting down the spoon. "What happened?" Elvis tried to shrug it off, tried to act like it didn't matter, like it was just a stupid school thing that didn't mean anything. "Didn't get selected. It's fine." "Elvis Aaron Presley, don't you lie to your mama. Come sit down." Gladys pulled out a chair at their small kitchen table, and Elvis sat, and once he started talking, Once he started explaining about the audition and Jensen's face and being told he wasn't what they were looking for, and Barbara Henderson, and the way Jensen's voice had suddenly gotten warm and welcoming for her, everything came pouring out in a rush of words and hurt. Gladys listened without interrupting, but Elvis could see her getting angrier with each sentence he spoke. Her jaw got tight, her hands clenched on the table, and by the time he finished, she was standing up and pacing the small kitchen because she was too furious to sit still. "That man," she said, her voice shaking with rage, "has no right to tell my son he's not good enough. No right at all. Mama, he's a music teacher. He's been doing this for 23 years. He knows what he's talking about. Maybe I'm just not. He knows how to make kids sing like trained monkeys," Gladys interrupted, stopping her pacing to face her son directly. "All the same, all boring, all following rules like little soldiers. But real music? Music that makes people feel something? Music that comes from the soul? He wouldn't recognize that if it walked up and introduced itself." Elvis wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the same certainty she did, but Jensen's words kept echoing in his head. "Not what we're looking for. Unsuitable. Inappropriate. Consider whether music is really where your talents lie." "Baby, look at me," Gladys said, crouching down so she was eye level with her son, taking his face in her hands. "You remember what I told you when you were 8 years old, when those kids at church made fun of you for singing too loud during hymns? You said I had a gift from God. And do you still believe that?" Elvis hesitated, looking away. "I don't know anymore, Mama. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just being too loud. Maybe Mr. Jensen is right too." Gladys grabbed his face more firmly, making him look at her. "Then let me believe it for both of us until you. Remember, because I know something Mr. Harold Jensen doesn't know. I know my son has something special. I've known it since the first time I heard you hum along to the radio when you were 3 years old. And one day, you hear me, baby, one day that man is going to lie to reporters and say he always believed in you, that he always knew you'd be a star. But we'll know the truth. We'll remember this day when he told you that you weren't good enough." Elvis nodded, not entirely convinced but grateful for his mother's faith, even when his own was failing. 3 weeks passed. The Spring Talent Showcase was scheduled for Friday, May 25th at 7:00 p.m. in the school auditorium. Elvis had no intention of attending. The thought of sitting there watching Barbara Henderson and the other selected performers, watching them do what he'd been told he wasn't good enough to do, made him feel physically sick. But Gladys had other ideas. "You're going," she said on Thursday night. "Mama, no, I don't want to torture myself." "You need to see what they chose over you," Gladys insisted. "You need to sit in that audience and watch what Mr. Harold Jensen thinks is better than my son's talent. You need to feel this, baby. Because someday when you're famous, and you will be famous, you'll understand why this had to happen. You'll understand that their rejection wasn't about you being not good enough. It was about them not being ready for what you are." So Elvis found himself on Friday evening, dressed in his best shirt, the one without any frayed spots on the collar, walking into the Humes High School auditorium alongside his mother. The place was packed, every seat filled with parents and students and teachers. The auditorium smelled like perfume and hair oil and the musty stage curtains that hadn't been cleaned in years. Elvis and Gladys found seats in the back row, as far from the stage as possible. Elvis slouched down, making himself small, hoping no one would notice him or ask why he was there. The showcase began at 7:15, slightly delayed because of technical issues with one of the microphones. Mr. Harold Jensen came out first to welcome everyone, speaking in his clipped formal way about celebrating the artistic achievements of Humes High School students and showcasing the finest examples of youthful talent in Memphis. Elvis felt sick hearing him talk. The acts began. First was Melissa Chen, a junior who played Chopin on the piano with mechanical precision. Then came the Baxter twins, who did a comedy routine that got polite laughter but wasn't particularly funny. Then David Morrison on trumpet, playing a classical piece that Elvis didn't recognize but that made people in the audience nod appreciatively. Every act was exactly what Jensen wanted: safe, appropriate, technically proficient, and completely forgettable. Then Barbara Henderson took the stage. She wore a light blue dress that probably cost more than Elvis's family paid in rent for 3 months. Her hair was styled in perfect curls. She smiled graciously at the audience and positioned herself at center stage with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she wasn't good enough for anything. The piano accompanist began, and Barbara sang "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" with perfect pitch control and zero emotional connection. Every note was technically correct. Every breath was placed exactly where it should be. Her diction was flawless, and the whole performance felt as empty as an unused room. The audience applauded politely. Mr. Harold Jensen, sitting in the front row, beamed like a proud father whose daughter had just validated all his beliefs about what proper music should be. Elvis felt something twist in his chest. This was what they wanted. This was what they'd chosen over him. Safe, predictable, dead. He couldn't watch anymore. During the intermission between the first and second half of the program, Elvis stood up to leave. He couldn't sit there for another hour watching more of the same. "Where are you going?" Gladys whispered. "I can't stay, Mama, I just can't." Elvis, but he was already moving toward the aisle, squeezing past knees and apologizing, making his way toward the exit. As he walked through the lobby toward the front doors, someone called his name. "Elvis! Hey, Elvis Presley!" He turned to see Scotty Mitchell jogging toward him. Scotty was a senior, tall and lanky with red hair that never stayed combed. He sometimes worked the soundboard for school events and was known as one of the few students who actually understood the audio equipment. "Man, I was hoping you'd show up," Scotty said, slightly out of breath. "Come backstage with me for a second. I want to show you something." "I don't want to go backstage, Scotty. I'm leaving." "Come on, just for 2 minutes. I've been working on something and I need your opinion." "Please?" Elvis didn't know why he agreed. Maybe it was because Scotty was one of the few people at school who'd ever been genuinely nice to him without wanting something in return. Maybe it was because leaving felt cowardly and going backstage felt slightly less pathetic than running away. Whatever the reason, he followed Scotty through the side door and into the backstage area. The backstage of the Humes Auditorium was a maze of old set pieces, forgotten props, and equipment that hadn't been used in years. The air smelled like dust and paint and something vaguely chemical. Scotty led Elvis to a corner where some old musical equipment was stored under a tarp. "Check this out," Scotty said, pulling back the tarp to reveal an electric guitar and a small amplifier. "Found these in the storage closet. They're old as hell, but I got them working again. The amp's got this incredible tone. Want to try it?" "Scotty, I can't. I'm not supposed to be back here. If Jensen sees me..." "It's intermission. Nobody's paying attention. Come on, just play something for like 30 seconds. I want to hear what this setup sounds like with someone who can actually play." Elvis looked at the guitar. It was a semi-hollow body electric, probably from the late 1940s, with worn frets and a finish that had been dinged and scratched by years of use. But when he picked it up, it felt substantial in his hands, heavier than the acoustic he'd borrowed from Tommy Wilson, more serious somehow. He strummed a few chords tentatively, and the sound that came through the amp was rich and full, with a warm distortion that was completely different from anything he'd played before. "See?" Scotty said, grinning. "Isn't that amazing? Now play something for real. Play that song you did at the audition." Elvis hesitated. The backstage area was supposed to be off-limits to non-performers. If Jensen caught him back here with an amplified guitar during the showcase, there would be consequences. But Scotty was looking at him with such genuine enthusiasm, such uncomplicated belief, that Elvis could make something worth hearing, that he couldn't refuse. "Okay," Elvis said, but quietly, just for a second. He started playing "That's All Right," fingers finding the chords, voice coming in soft and low, just testing the sound at first, just seeing how the electric guitar changed the feel of the song. But then something happened that always happened when Elvis sang. He forgot where he was. He forgot the showcase happening on the other side of the curtain. He forgot Jensen and Barbara Henderson and being rejected. He forgot everything except the music and the way it felt moving through his body, the way his voice and the guitar were having a conversation that didn't need words. His body started moving with the rhythm, subtle at first, just a slight sway, a tap of his foot. But as the song built, as he got deeper into it, the movements became more pronounced. His hips shifted. His shoulders rolled. His whole self got caught up in the feeling, in the blues inflection meeting the country twang, in something that was entirely his own. What Elvis didn't know What he couldn't see from his corner of the backstage area was that the door leading from backstage to the auditorium was propped open about 6 inches. The stage crew had left it that way to allow air circulation during the hot May evening, and the sound from Scotty's amplifier was carrying through that open door into the auditorium, where people were still milling around during intermission. At first, it was just a few students who noticed. Sarah Martinez, a sophomore, was walking past the stage area when she heard something that made her stop. "What is that?" she whispered to her friend. "I don't know, but it sounds amazing," her friend whispered back. They moved closer to the stage, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Other students noticed them stopping and came to investigate. Parents saw their children gathering near the stage and came to see what was happening. Within 2 minutes of Elvis starting to sing, a crowd of about 30 people had formed in the side aisle and near the stage, all of them listening to this strange, powerful sound coming from somewhere backstage. Elvis was completely unaware. He had his eyes closed, lost in the music, finishing the final verse of "That's All Right" with everything he had. When he opened his eyes, Scotty was staring at him with an expression of pure amazement. "Dude," Scotty said quietly. "The door was open." "What door?" "The stage door. People heard you." Elvis felt his stomach drop. "What?" "No. How many people?" Before Scotty could answer, students started appearing backstage. Just a few at first, then more, squeezing through the stage door, coming around through the side entrance, filling the backstage area that was only supposed to have authorized personnel. "Who was singing?" someone asked. "That was incredible," a girl Elvis vaguely recognized from his history class said. "Play another one," someone else shouted. Elvis stood frozen, the guitar still in his hands, absolutely overwhelmed. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be performing. Then, Mr. Harold Jensen appeared, pushing through the growing crowd of students with an expression of barely controlled fury. "What's going on back here?" Jensen demanded. His face was flushed, his voice tight with anger. "This area is restricted to performers only. All of you need to return to your seats immediately. And Presley," he pointed at Elvis, "what do you think you're doing? You are not authorized to be backstage, and you are absolutely not authorized to be playing amplified music during a school event." "Mr. Jensen," interrupted Mrs. Patricia Walsh, the school's drama teacher who'd been supervising the backstage area. She appeared behind Jensen, her arms crossed. "Did you hear that boy sing?" "I heard unauthorized noise disrupting a carefully planned program," Jensen snapped. "That wasn't noise, Harold," Mrs. Walsh said, and something in her tone made Elvis look up. "That was the most interesting thing I've heard all evening. Actually, scratch that. It's the most interesting thing I've heard in the 5 years I've been at this school." "Interesting is not the standard by which we judge performances for a family showcase," Jensen said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. He was aware of the crowd of students and parents now watching this exchange. "Then maybe your standards need adjustment," said Mr. Robert Duncan, pushing through to stand next to Mrs. Walsh. Duncan was a history teacher, young and popular with students, known for sometimes challenging the administration when he thought they were wrong. "My daughter told me this boy auditioned for the showcase," said a woman Elvis didn't know, stepping forward. She wore an expensive-looking dress and had the bearing of someone used to being listened to. "She said he was really good. Why wasn't he selected?" Jensen's face got redder. "The showcase has a carefully curated program based on multiple factors: technical proficiency, appropriateness for a family audience, and adherence to performance standards. Mr. Presley's style didn't meet those criteria." "What criteria?" another parent asked. "Because from what I just heard, he's got more talent than most of the kids in your approved program." "Talent isn't the only consideration," Jensen said, his voice rising slightly. "Presentation matters. Appropriateness matters. We have standards of decorum that must be maintained. The way Mr. Presley moves when he performs is not suitable for a school event." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Mrs. Walsh spoke, her voice cold. "Are you seriously telling me you rejected this boy because he moves when he sings, because he feels the music?" "Harold, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say, and you've said a lot of stupid things over the years." Several students laughed nervously. A few parents nodded in agreement. Jensen looked around at the faces challenging him, and Elvis could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that was slipping away from him. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and being questioned in front of students and parents. "The program for tonight is set," Jensen said finally, his voice tight. "We are not making changes mid-performance. Everyone needs to return to their seats so we can continue the second half of the showcase, and Mr. Presley needs to leave the backstage area immediately." "Fine," said Mrs. Walsh, "but I'm making a formal note for next year's showcase committee, and I'm going to be having a conversation with Principal Matthews about how talent is evaluated for these events. This is ridiculous, Harold." Jensen turned and walked away, his back rigid with anger and wounded pride. The crowd of students and parents slowly dispersed, but not before several of them approached Elvis. "You were amazing," a girl told him. "Seriously, you should start a band or something," said a boy Elvis recognized from gym class. "My uncle runs the youth center on Beale Street," offered another student. "They have live music on Friday nights. I bet he'd let you play." "There's a guy I know who has a radio show," said a senior girl. "I could probably get you an audition if you want." Elvis nodded to all of them, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, grateful and confused and still processing what had just happened. Scotty appeared at his elbow. "Dude, that was insane! You just became the most talked about person at this entire showcase, and you weren't even supposed to be performing." Elvis managed a weak smile. "Jensen's gonna kill me." "Who cares? Everyone else loved it. That's what matters." The second half of the showcase continued, but the energy in the auditorium had changed. Students whispered to each other about the music they'd heard from backstage. Parents talked quietly about the boy who'd been excluded and whether the selection process was fair. When Barbara Henderson took her final bow at the end of the evening, half the audience was still thinking about the singer they'd only heard by accident. After the show ended and people began filing out, Elvis found his mother waiting for him in the lobby. She had tears in her eyes. "I heard you, baby," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I heard you from my seat, and I knew everyone else was hearing it too." Walking home that night through the Memphis streets, under streetlights that turned everything orange and strange, Elvis was quiet. "What are you thinking about?" Gladys asked. "Mr. Jensen," Elvis said. "He was so sure I wasn't good enough. So absolutely certain I didn't belong. And maybe he was right. Maybe I don't belong in his showcase. Maybe I don't fit into what he thinks music should be." Gladys stopped walking and turned to face her son. "And maybe that's exactly why you're going to change everything. You think those people tonight, those students and parents and teachers who heard you, you think they'll forget that? You think they'll forget what it felt like to hear something real after sitting through an hour of Barbara Henderson and kids playing scales?" Elvis didn't answer, but something in his mother's certainty made him stand a little straighter. Over the next few months, Elvis started performing anywhere that would have him. The youth center on Beale Street gave him a Friday night slot. He got an audition for a local radio amateur hour and won first place. A small restaurant hired him to play during dinner on weekends. Each time he performed, he sang with the same energy and movement that Jensen had called inappropriate. And each time, people responded, not with polite applause, but with genuine enthusiasm, with requests for specific songs, with tips in a jar that sometimes added up to more than his daddy made in a day. The rejection from the Spring Talent Showcase didn't destroy Elvis. It clarified him. It taught him that he didn't need approval from people like Harold Jensen to be worth something. It showed him that the audience that mattered, the real audience, would find him if he just kept being himself. By 1954, Elvis had a recording contract with Sun Records. By 1955, he was playing sold-out shows across the South. By 1956, he was the biggest star in America, his name synonymous with a revolution in popular music. In March 1957, the Memphis Commercial Appeal ran a feature article about Elvis Presley's meteoric rise to fame. The reporter, looking for local angles, interviewed several of his former teachers from Humes High School. Mr. Harold Jensen was quoted in the article. "I remember Elvis well from his time at Humes. He was a special student with a unique quality that set him apart from others. I always knew he had something remarkable. I'm very proud to have been one of his teachers, and I'm delighted to see him achieving such tremendous success." When Elvis read that, Quote, in his dressing room before a show in Las Vegas, he laughed so hard that his manager thought something was wrong. "What's so funny?" asked Tom Parker. "This," Elvis said, showing him the article. "This teacher telling reporters he always believed in me. He rejected me from the school talent show, told me I wasn't appropriate, suggested I consider whether music was really where my talents were. And now he's taking credit for recognizing my potential." Parker shrugged. "That's how it works, kid. Success has 1,000 fathers. Failure is an orphan." Elvis carefully cut out the article and saved it, not as a trophy of vindication, but as a reminder. A reminder that the people who reject you rarely remember they did it, that success doesn't require their approval or validation, and that sometimes being told you're not good enough is exactly the push you need to prove everyone wrong. Years later, when interviewers asked Elvis about the obstacles he'd faced on his way to success, he sometimes mentioned Harold Jensen and the Spring Talent Showcase. "That rejection hurt," Elvis would say. "It really hurt. I was 16 years old, and I wanted so badly to be accepted, to fit in, to be told I was good enough. And this teacher looked me in the eye and basically said I'd never amount to anything in music. For a while I believed him, but then I realized something important. He wasn't rejecting me because I wasn't talented. He was rejecting me because I didn't fit his definition of what talent should look like, and that wasn't my problem to solve. That was his limitation, not mine." The music teacher rejected Elvis from the talent show because he didn't fit the mold, because he moved wrong, because he mixed genres that weren't supposed to be mixed, because he felt the music too deeply instead of controlling it with proper technique. What Elvis did backstage, that accidental performance that reached an audience Jensen never intended him to have, didn't just prove the teacher wrong. It showed everyone in that auditorium what they'd been missing. It demonstrated that real talent doesn't always follow the rules, that authenticity matters more than appropriateness, and that sometimes the people who don't fit in are the ones who change everything. Harold Jensen spent the rest of his career teaching music theory at Humes High School. He retired in 1968 with a modest pension and a reputation as a strict but fair educator. He never publicly acknowledged that he'd rejected Elvis Presley from the Spring Talent Showcase of 1951, and he never corrected the newspaper articles that quoted him claiming to have recognized Elvis's talent. But Elvis remembered, and that memory of standing on a wooden platform being told he wasn't good enough became part of the fuel that drove him to become the most revolutionary performer in the history of popular music. Sometimes rejection is just rejection, but sometimes it's the beginning of everything.